another group that did free throws until they had done one really exquisitely. Then they stopped. Now, this makes sense if you think about the mirror neurons. As soon as you had an event that was exquisite, then you would stop, then you'd sit down, and of course, when you go to rehearse what's there, what have you got? That last exquisite, wonderful example. And so you're rehearsing that example over and over. You're replaying that example as opposed to the person who's actually out there continuing to shoot free throws. Is that they're then getting every one of those that some are on, some are off, and so forth. Whereas the person, when they did the really good performance, stops, rehearses it, they're deepening, the brain is a neural net, they're deepening the attractor circuit, the neurons that are tied together for that particular behavior. Because that's the one they have in mind, and they repeat that and repeat that. Now, the interesting thing is, the people in the stands didn't improve. The people that actually threw the free throws, they improved. And the people that did this kind of systematic practice improved the most. But wait, Charles, you said that if you do it in your head, it's just like you were there and you did it. With this difference. That when you don't engage the connection between the mirror neurons and the long muscles, then that connection is still as rough as it ever was. In other words, athletes, going to the idea of representational systems, have more connections to do a certain sport. So the person who actually makes the connection between the mirror neurons and the long muscles and then rehearses that whole circuit is going to get more result than the person who's merely watching it and seeing, well, can I connect it here? Because they didn't actually do it. And by the way, it works in the other direction. If you take up a musical instrument, and there has to be that physicality, you can't just listen to music. You can listen to music, you can develop your auditory. It'll work. If you take up a musical instrument, holding violin, Steve was telling him about his kids, because his kids have gone to Waldorf schools, and the fix is in. We now know that playing physically, or guitar, whatever it is, playing a musical instrument, the connection between that muscle circuit and the brain literally builds brain cells. It goes in both directions. In other words, the imagining will influence the body, and the body, actually utilizing the body for certain things, can build up more capacity in the mind. The brain is much more plastic than they realize. Now, we knew this in NLP, but I'm sharing this with you because, well, as I was saying to the master trackers, they're going, can we use this stuff covertly? And I'm saying, look, you belong to a field. No, you too belong to a field where if you have the person who's feeling phobic, right? And they go, oh, elevators, and so they see the elevator, they're terrified, or whatever it is. And you say, have them step out of the movie, watch the movie over there, so they watch themselves, right? Okay, run it backwards, and step back in, and what happens? They're not phobic anymore. You belong to a field that if you think you're stepping into an imaginary circle, you get resourceful. Circle of excellence. If you don't tell people you're doing a technique, everything you do is covert. Because it's unbelievable. But what I'm sharing with you is some of the research that's showing not only is it believable, they're figuring out how it works. And while that may not make it work better, it often supports you in the idea, yes, do this. And realize the difference things make. So the first difference I want to make this morning is to give you a launching point, a way of stepping from this program to wherever the hell you're going. And one of the things we find, you also know about the research on people learning in a context. Learning is context dependent. All right. Again, studies, I don't know where they get the money for these. Somebody's got to let me know. I could use this money. A bunch of medical students, end of term exam, standard end of term, came into their classroom, take the exam. They had been asked, because of an experiment, psychological experiment, to leave an extra 3 hours after the exam. They said, fine, sure, we'll do that. We're game, we're medical doctor. We're going to be medical doctors someday. We're going to experiment on people. We understand this. So they came in and took their exam in the morning, went away, had some lunch, came back in the afternoon, and they were escorted over to that auditorium where the basketball experiments were going on. They sat them down in the bleachers and they handed them the same exam. And you know what happened? They scored between 20 and 40% less than they did in the classroom where they learned the material. This is called context dependence. And it's well verified. I'll give you one experiment of many. It's well verified. That means that this room here, given that we've done so many NLP trainings, is the place to do NLP. You just walk in this room and it will happen. The difficulty is that none of you are taking this room with you. But you could in your mind. And I do suggest that you consider that. I also consider that you suggest that you transfer those skills from here to where it is you want them to be. What we call what? Future pacing. Future pacing. It's like imagining yourself doing what you've done here in a context in the future. So what I want to start with this morning is some goal setting. That is to figure out what the hell one of you wants, or each of both of you, whichever. Because I want those skills to get where you want them to be. You spent all the time and effort and money here. So the idea is, what of these skills do you want where in your life? And to formulate that as a goal. All right? Now, we got some paper back there? We're going to have you do the Longman study. It actually is called the Longman study. The Longman study, often considered apocryphal, actually true, is where they had people from 3 American East Coast universities just after World War II. They got the graduates, they talked to them, they found out which graduates wrote down their goals for life and which ones had not, and they checked up with them after a decade as longitudinal study. This study included Ted Kennedy. If that influences your thinking, so be it. And they had the people write down their goals. Now, in this case, I'm having you one goal at a time for the purposes of the exercise. It's an interesting thing. What you're doing is you're taking an internal dialogue and you're externalizing it. How many of you, if you're not sure of the spelling of a word, will write it down to see it more clearly? Yeah, well, we're talking about the same thing here. It's the idea that you're taking something, a thought, and by writing it down and putting it on the outside, you can see it more clearly. It also dissociates it from you, gives you a different perceptual position, and allows you to interact with it differently. So somewhere on that page, and I do suggest the top, the side, or the bottom, but not the middle. If you do use the middle, you'll find out why I suggested the top, the side, or the bottom in a few minutes. To write down a goal that you have coming out of this training. Now, what do we know about goal setting? We have the 5 conditions, yes? Stated in the positive, that should be the easy one at this point. I want to be able to, or I want to, or I'm going to. Okay? And the second condition? Specific. Now, this gets trickier because people will often say something like, I want to utilize all my NLP skills. And I'm going, yes, it's a good idea. The thing is that if you go for all, that's such a generalization, your brain goes, all. Make me one with everything. Yeah, and mayo. But you want to specify. Now, there's an interesting way to specify that. Especially if you're talking about a state, a practice, a skill, is where do you want it to show up first? What part of the skill do you want to show up first? Remember that thing, the Erickson numbers, first, second, third, fourth? You can make a positive use of that by suggesting to yourself, okay, I'm thinking about going back to wherever it is I'm going to, and it might be my office, it might be my home, it might be my family, it might be my business, it might be my church. Context, right? And what specifically of this skill do I want to show up? And here we go to sensory-based. What do you want to see, hear, feel that'll let you know that you're starting to integrate those skills into your everyday life? Now, people say, but I don't want to just start. I'm going, but you do. Because if you're starting, that presupposes it'll keep going. That's the idea of the first, second, third, fourth. So you want to think about something that could be fairly easy for you to do, something you'd expect yourself to do, but you might not if you don't take this step. You'd expect that you'd build rapport with people when you see them. You'd expect you'd listen for their language, try to find out something about their model of the world. You might expect you'd notice their accessing cues or their voice tone or how they mark out certain words. But then again, if you don't actually do the future pace, you get back there and go, God, what happened that summer? Meanwhile, this room is filled with NLP resources. People walk in the room, they're changed, So we want to get that to where you're going to be. So writing down now, what is one of your goals? You probably had it since before the course. We're visiting it now because now you've got the skills in yourself. Let's take them to where you want them. So that's the idea, a goal of this course that will be evidence for you that you're beginning to integrate those skills into a specific context of your choosing, which is coming up next week maybe. So make a note, your words. All right, you got a few words there. Now, if you're writing a lot, and I have no objection to that, what you want to do is pick off a couple of words or a phrase or an image in that whole bit of writing that means that to you. In other words, you want to make it easier for your mind to keep in mind. It's like trying to quote some politicians these days. It's gone. We want a sound bite in this case. But it's your sound bite. You pick it, not somebody else picks it. All right. As you finish that up, and it's just finishing up, making that thought of what it is, this goal, I want to remind you, gentlemen, that the women are smarter than the men in this respect. Is that the language part, the broca region, the language generating part of the brain is on one side in guys and a little bit on both sides for the women. This is why they hear tonality. They hear everything. Just so you're not too paranoid, okay? Good. It's just an encouragement to develop your acuity because they have already. And what I'm getting at here is that when you write down a goal, you are externalizing an internal dialogue. You're seeing it in a new way. You're interacting with it. You're reading it. And you're only using half your brain. It's a half-brain goal. The other side of the brain, which we take to be the creative part and all, well, really, it's about color. And it's about imagery. And about shape. And so in order to get a full brain engagement, I mean, why not? If you're going to have goals in your life, if you're going to want to future pace this, you want it to be there, you want to have both sides of your brain working, is for you to draw a picture that will in some way represent that goal for you. Now, before you do, let me offer you two comments. First, I come from Chicago. We have a museum there. They got these pictures from the Impressionists and Expressionists